just so that everyone is aware, and that way it'll be available for the community and for everyone to access after the webinar has ended. So in terms of how we're going to be doing this, we're going to start with the pre-submitted questions that we've received through our WhatsApp groups, through our email. And from that, after that, we'll move on to the questions that are being submitted live on the forum right now. You can upvote questions that are already posted. So what we ask is that if you have a specific question, please post it in the question box. And if you have a comment to make, then please post it in the chat. That way we can ensure that we're not missing anything. There's lots of questions, and any questions that we're not able to address in today's session, we are monitoring all of our forums, and we will follow up in subsequent sessions. With that, let's start with our question and answers. So just moving on, Dr. Sharkawy, if I could start with you. I'd like to start with the first group of questions that are actually very similar. So I'll just read them all out and then you can answer. One of the first questions is basically, what are vaccines? How do they work in our body? What are the ingredients of the COVID vaccines, of the different COVID vaccines? And the biggest question coming out of that is, are the ingredients halal?
Sure, all very important questions to raise. To try and put things very simply, we have to understand that vaccines are meant to trigger our body's immune system to react to the threat of an infection, and they are there to prime our body's immune systems to be able to do so. So what happens when we get sick in general is that our immune system responds because the immune system has seen this threat before, and it deploys what are called antibodies. The antibodies are certain proteins that our immune system makes, and those antibodies will seek out and destroy this invading threat so that we don't become very sick, and the limit to our sickness is hopefully short-lived and we don't have further complications. But when our immune system hasn't recognized this threat before, if it's a novel threat, for example, unlike a common cold, for instance, then our immune system has no registered memory for it. And we are at risk of becoming very, very sick because we have no file in our hard drive, if you will, to be able to attack the invading threat. So vaccines work based on a concept of actually taking either a weakened form or a protein of a given bacteria or virus. And it's such a small quantity of the protein or the genetic material of a given bacteria or virus that it is unlikely to cause any harm itself. But what it does is it triggers a response in our immune system. Our immune system goes through different phases of producing different types of antibodies. In an early stage, where the antibodies are meant to try and seek out and destroy things on a sort of very non-specific level. And then over time, they create what are called memory cells or B cells. And these are the cells that really store the information in our immune system's hard drive, if you will, so that if and when we are exposed to the real threat, the virus or the bacteria at a later date, they are there to actually sound off the alarm and to trigger a whole bunch of other types of antibodies and something called T cells in our immune system that literally go out on a wide-scale seek and destroy mission to prevent whatever infection it is from establishing itself in our bodies and making us sick, and hopefully at the same time preventing us from being able to share an infection with other people and transmit it to people, even though we may have been exposed. Now, in terms of the ingredients of the vaccines, we really have two vaccines that have been approved right now, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines. Those are both what are called mRNA vaccines. And soon, probably at some point in the next several weeks, we will have approval of what are called the viral vector vaccines, which are the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine. The mRNA vaccines are made up of mRNA. mRNA is a type of genetic material that will allow our bodies, our cells, to direct a change in our immune system to produce a response to the virus. In this case, it actually produces the spike proteins that are the proteins that cause attachment of COVID-19, the SARS coronavirus 2, into our cells and starts potentially making us quite sick. That is the basic building block of those vaccines. It doesn't alter our DNA. It doesn't do anything other than working like a USB key that goes into our cells and triggers this response. It instructs our cells to make the spike proteins. That's the main component. The other components are basically a mix of things like salts, sugar, water, and fat, lipids. And the lipids in particular are very important. In the mRNA vaccines, they take the form of something called polyethylene glycol. And that's something that's widely distributed in things like cosmetics and different foods and a lot of different medication. And if you've ever had a colonoscopy, it's part of what's called the prep for that because it really helps trigger your bowels, okay? The main issue here is that the lipid formulation is what changes the property that allows for the storage of Moderna in relatively conventional settings, but requires the ultra cold storage for the Pfizer vaccine. And the purpose of this lipid is to actually protect the vaccine so that it is, as it is going into the cell, it's not degraded. It's sort of like a protective sheath. And once it's inside ourselves, the fat sort of breaks down and it becomes degraded and the mRNA can then work. Without it, it wouldn't be insulated properly. It would be broken down before it got into our cells. As you can see, there are no pork products in that. There is no gelatin, which is derived from animal products. So for all intents and purposes, from a halal or Islamic standpoint, it is perfectly safe to be using the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. The Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca vaccines are what we call viral vector vaccines. So what they use is a weakened form of a virus. In this case, it's something called the adenovirus. And adenovirus causes lots of different common upper respiratory tract infections, including variants of the common cold. And our body is naturally capable of responding with some antibodies to the adenovirus because it's known to our immune system. And what we have done with these viral vector vaccines is we've incorporated a small amount of the genetic material of the SARS coronavirus that causes COVID-19 into this adenovirus, and it gives it a ride. It's the vector or vehicle that actually delivers it into our cells and allows our cells to then trigger an immune response because the viral vector is part of that. That virus will trigger an immune response and at the same time will allow a more specific response to happen to COVID-19. The ingredients are largely not all that different otherwise with these viral vector vaccines compared to the mRNA vaccines. There's still a composite of things like salts, sugars, fats. In the case of these vaccines, they use something called polysorbate 80, and that's sort of a stabilizing agent. You'll find that in things like ice cream or a lot of different products you might actually buy at the supermarket. It's a gumming agent, it's a sticky agent. It actually holds together the vaccine material again to make sure it doesn't degrade. Again, no animal products here, no concerns in terms of gelatin, etc. You probably will want to know, however, that these vaccines are manufactured in a cell line that is constituted from fetal cells. And I think it's important to clarify for people what that means. There's a lot of misinformation that suggests that if it's derived from fetal cells, it is perpetuating or endorsing the practice of abortion. And that is absolutely untrue. and I'm sorry if this is veering off a little bit, but I think it's really, really important for people to understand. There are a wide range of vaccines that are created in human embryonic kidney cells and other aborted fetal cell lines, but they are related to only two abortions, one that occurred in 1973 and another in 1985, and that is it. It's already happened. And what happens is that the fetal cell line allows material to replicate much more effectively, much more efficiently, and in larger quantities than would otherwise be the case. It's almost like a culture medium, if you will, for producing these vaccines. There are a number of vaccines that use this technology, which include MMR, which we use widely for our children, the varicella vaccine for chickenpox, for example, the polio vaccine as well, all use this technology. So please understand, you are not endorsing abortion by doing this. You are simply exploiting something that already took place. We are not perpetuating or recommending further abortions as a means for practicing vaccine distribution to anyone else. It's very important. And I'll leave Islamic jurists to discuss the issue, but everyone that I have spoken to from an Islamic jurisprudence point of view will tell you that if there are no other safe alternatives, that you should always err on the side of protecting yourself, protecting your community, that is ethical, that's responsible, that is within the tenets of our religion, and I think is something that most sound-minded people would agree with. Apologize if I went a little over time there.
Well, thank you for addressing those points. Those are very, very valid concerns that that we have in the Muslim community. So I appreciate your going into that detail, Dr. Sharkawy.
And no apologies when we're sharing information. So our next set of questions, they're actually myths that we're hoping Dr. Shamji will help debunk for us a little bit. So the first two are similar. Can I get COVID from the vaccine? And if I've already had COVID-19, do I need to get the vaccine?
So these are really, really wonderful questions. And I think, to be honest with you, Dr. Sharkawy has already begun to help us understand what the answers could be. When he was describing the construction of the viruses, if you're listening carefully, you'll notice that, when he was describing the construction of the vaccines, if you listen carefully, all we use to generate these vaccines are just fragments. In the case of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, it's not even fragments. It's a little bit of genetic code that has been artificially synthesized with the genetic printer. So it's just a little bit of mRNA. And we count on our body to turn that mRNA into just a small, tiny little protein, what's called the spike protein, which is the part of the real coronavirus that actually causes infection and ultimately leads to the virus. So it is impossible. With the vaccines that we have, all we do is we deliver just a very small amount of genetic material that codes for just a single protein, but doesn't actually give any other instructions as to how to, it cannot build an entire protein, it cannot build an entire virus, and does not in any way, shape, or form contain actually any actual real parts of COVID-19. So I'm happy to say it's completely impossible to get COVID-19 by receiving a vaccine. I think one thing that's important to note, and I can even attest to this myself, after I got the second dose of the vaccine, I had a little bit of chills in the evening. I woke up the next morning, I had a little bit of a headache. And that does not mean that I had COVID-19. In fact, when I think about that, that is a really, really positive sign. It is a sign that my body has been patrolling appropriately, and it's detected some unusual proteins that need to be targeted. That night after I got the vaccine, when I had just a little bit of chills and I woke up the next day with a little bit of a headache, that made me happy because it told me that my immune system had activated and had appropriately detected something foreign and was going in and attacking that foreign particle. And in the future, I know that the same thing will play out again if I'm ever exposed to the real COVID-19. And it will go and it will attack that. It will annihilate it. And in almost every case, it will make sure that I don't actually contract COVID-19. So big no, you cannot get COVID-19 from the vaccine.
Okay.
Now sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. We have one more myth we're hoping you can debunk for us is the COVID vaccine can alter my DNA, insert a tracker or microchip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can understand the moment we start talking about a vaccine in which we're giving you some genetic material, I could 100% understand why you might become concerned that it could actually insert itself into our own human genome. And so one thing, even reflecting a little bit on what Dr. Sharkawy was saying, is that the two vaccines that we have currently, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, they comprise a kind of genetic material that's called messenger RNA. Messenger RNA is very different from our human genome. In fact, there is no process in the body that would allow messenger RNA to insert into the DNA that forms our human genome. So actually, it's entirely impossible. The reality is that when you are infected in real life by COVID-19, it does insert genetic material that still doesn't join into your human DNA. It can't cause cancer, even in the case of COVID-19. And it certainly can't cause cancer or cause any mutations in yourself just because you've received this genetic material. Now, the other, just responding to the other question that you asked, is it possible that, does the vaccine insert any sort of microchip or tracker or anything like that? So I can assure you that there is no such process in place. I had zero reservations when I got the COVID-19 vaccine myself. I'm not worried that I'm being monitored as a result of something that was inappropriately added to the vaccine. And in fact, I know that there are people who can track me, but they're more likely to do that every time I log into Facebook or Twitter or carry my phone around. So if we're truly worried that there's something in there that's tracking us, the truth is that that ship has probably sailed if we're carrying our cell phones around with us. But there is nothing in the vaccine that will allow anyone to track you, to listen to what you're saying, to hear your thoughts. That's simply impossible. So you can rest assured about that. The other question that you asked had also been around if you've already received COVID-19, is it possible to, does that mean that you don't need to get the vaccine? Well, I think one of the challenges is that even after someone has got COVID-19, we know that it's possible for there to be some ongoing immunity. We're not sure exactly how long that lasts. We think it probably lasts for at least 90 days, but we're not sure how much longer after that. And as a result, if you've had COVID-19, say in the first wave in March, there's actually no guarantee that you remain immune at this current time. And so we would absolutely recommend, and also add that it is 100% safe to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, even if you've received COVID-19 before.
Dr. Sharkawy, did you want to follow up to that?
Sure. I think Dr. Shamji did a very nice job articulating the importance of the fact that we don't have a bona fide way of knowing how long immunity lasts. There is reasonable evidence from some studies that we think it could last at least 7 or 8 months. The real problem is that we don't have a wide scale and available and accessible at not for cost antibody testing to know when we are immune exactly and how immune we may be. And I think the issue is probably a bit more relevant right now because we have a little bit of a supply issue. So just one caveat that I would note is that if you've had COVID within the last 90 days, for example, we probably wouldn't be putting you near the top of the queue. You'd probably be a little lower down because it would be more likely that you're still in the process of developing immunity compared to someone else who has not had exposure, who has not had either the vaccine or natural means of immunity. being acquired. But I agree, I think with vaccine supply hopefully becoming a lesser issue over the next several weeks, ultimately we would want to have everybody vaccinated with one vaccine or another, even if you have had COVID-19.
Thank you. Sorry, Mira, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So our next question is actually for Dr. Yu. Can women who are pregnant or breastfeeding receive the vaccine?
Hi, thank you for that question. So just in a little bit of context, maybe, as a family doctor in the community, we see a lot of pregnant women, and a lot of the vaccinations in anyone's lifetimes are actually administered by our primary care nurses, as well as our primary care or family physician, so our family practitioners. So we've been tasked over the years to really look at what information is credible and what is not, and then offer the vaccinations to our patients. When a pregnant woman comes to me or a breastfeeding woman comes to me and asks this question around whether she should get the vaccine, I understand that there are some credible sources for this information and some not so credible. What I can share with you is some information with regards to the 2 vaccines that are already approved. And I highlight that because the 2 vaccines that are already approved are non-live vaccines. And perhaps Dr. Sharkawy, I'll invite you later to explain that a little bit more. The vaccines that we have, the Moderna vaccine as well as the Pfizer vaccine, are non-live vaccines. And therefore, in that context, what I would say is that yes, pregnant women and breastfeeding women should be offered this vaccine. I will read a bit of a quote from a credible source that I rely on, which is the Society of Obstetrics and Gynecologists of Canada. And what they say and what they particularly recommend is this, that during a pandemic, the default should be to offer vaccines to pregnant women alongside other affected populations. That the universal exclusion of pregnant women from the receipt of the COVID-19 vaccine based on a hypothetical risk to the fetus would leave pregnant women vulnerable to severe illness, which could also compromise the baby's health. So just to maybe expand on that just a little bit more, what we do know is that pregnant women, if they do get COVID, unfortunately tend to have the more severe form of the illness, that you are, if you're pregnant, more vulnerable to getting a more severe form of COVID. And always when we recommend any treatment, vaccines, or walk through with our patients what the next steps are in any kind of decision making, we weigh the risks and benefits. So, what I would recommend for pregnant patients that ask me this question is that weighing the risks and benefits, I believe that the benefits for the current approved vaccines that we have are much more so than the theoretical risks. Really, in my head, as I take care of pregnant women and their babies, I want the best for them. And I do feel strongly that at this point in time, given the evidence that we have, that it is that getting the COVID vaccine when you are pregnant and breastfeeding would benefit you much more so than the theoretical risks.
Thanks, Dr. Yu.
Sorry. And just to follow up with that, and Dr. Sharkawy, I know you wanted to add something. Do you want to jump in now? Or the second question is about sort of fertility and for folks who are trying to get pregnant. So it,
Can I just add a little bit more to Dr. Yu's very sound and reasonable articulation of the relative risks of COVID and pregnancy versus the vaccine. So there's a lot of reassuring points that should be highlighted here. Number one, as she mentioned very aptly, pregnant women receive a wide range of killed vaccines that don't contain live virus. And none of these vaccines have proven to have any degree of harm associated with them in pregnancy or labor, for example. And the mRNA vaccines fulfill that criterion. The other thing that's really important to understand is that there hasn't been any safety signal that's been identified first of all, in animal studies. You can argue animals are animals, humans are not, but that is still somewhat reassuring. The other thing is that even though the trials were expressly designed to prevent pregnant women from being enrolled, life happens, and we know sometimes pregnancy tests fail or people don't do as they are told. That happens once in a while. So in fact, there were 23 people that ended up being enrolled in the Pfizer study who became pregnant. 12 of them received the vaccine, 11 of them received the placebo. Of the 12 that received the vaccine, completely healthy pregnancies. In the 11 that received the placebo, one of them had a miscarriage. So that's in the placebo group. In the Moderna study, there was 13 who became pregnant. 6 of them received the vaccine, all safe, all healthy. 7 received the placebo. 1 had a therapeutic abortion and the other had a miscarriage. So all of the events of nature, whether they were intended abortions or spontaneous abortions, happened in the placebo groups. That should be fairly reassuring. Again, it's a small number, but that taken into the context of knowing these are killed vaccines should make us feel very confident that these are safe. And the World Health Organization actually recently endorsed these vaccines for use in pregnant women. And this was done after it was already the recommendation of the Center for Disease Control and most very respected obstetrical and gynecological bodies around the world. So this is all very reassuring, and hopefully people who become pregnant will recognize that this vaccine will help keep themselves and their babies safe, and they should not worry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharkawy. So I'm going to send it back to you, Dr. Yu, just to touch on, if you can, if I get this, can I get this vaccine if we're trying to have a baby, and does it affect my fertility?
Yeah, you know, this is a great question, and I can understand that when a family is hoping for a baby and wanting to have a baby, that this could be an emotional time in one's life. In general, my advice would be, if you are considering having a baby, that you would want to do your best to take care of your health. And part of taking care of your health is really protecting yourself from any kind of diseases that we can prevent. There are things that we can prevent and there are things that we can't. The COVID vaccine certainly helps prevent COVID. And as previously mentioned, pregnant women seem to be at higher risk of serious illness if they do get COVID. So for the best outcome for your both mother and baby, if you are contemplating on getting pregnant, I would suggest that you really consider getting the vaccine as soon as it is available. Now, I do know that the direct question here was, does it actually affect fertility? I don't believe there are any studies to specifically answer this question. For families that I've been privileged to look after who've had to go through the journey of going through fertility treatment, consider this: on a daily basis that you're going through fertility treatment, there's many appointments that you have to attend, and they are very much timed. Those appointments are timed based on your cycle and your ovulation. And you don't want to be at risk for getting COVID as you try to be going into your appointments for your fertility treatments. So what I would suggest, that putting everything into context, that when somebody is going through this journey of wanting to have a baby and going through fertility treatments, I think that COVID vaccination would be something that I would absolutely recommend.
And just one more, Dr. Yu, and then we'll pass it over. And that's, how can we ensure that isolated seniors living at home are prioritized to receive this vaccine?
This is a very good question. So I can, maybe Councillor Robinson had also alluded to this earlier. There are a number of factors in terms of the distribution and the rollout of the vaccine. There's the federal direction, there's the provincial distribution, and for us as frontline providers, really our goal is to advocate for those seniors that are isolated. We have certainly some home-based primary care programs specifically geared towards seniors who are at home. And we are continuing within our HATP programs to advocate for those seniors to receive the vaccine. My hope is that on the planning tables in the East Toronto Health Partners, we'll be able to, much as we've made COVID testing available more readily in the community, also make vaccinations more readily available to our seniors. I hope that we're going to be able to have teams that can go to homes of those who are specifically having challenges around getting out. Our primary approach to our planning is to bring the vaccines to community members rather than the other way around, that community members have to be searching and finding the vaccines. We are thinking of our isolated seniors, absolutely, in our many vulnerable populations in the planning. We will continue to work with Councillor Robinson and with others who are advocating to get this vaccine to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Yu. Dr. Sharkawy, did you want to add something?
Thank you, Story. I just wanted to clarify a really important point around the issue of fertility, because there's a lot of misinformation right now around the vaccines potentially being associated with infertility. And sadly, much of it has been propagated by a few individuals who I believe have a fairly skewed agenda in place. One of them is a disgruntled former Pfizer employee, unfortunately, who teamed up with a German physician who has had some pretty I would say, not well-established views on things. The crux of this is that there is a protein, a placental protein called syncytin-1. And this protein shares a very, very, very small amount of genetic information that is similar with the spike protein of the coronavirus. And the thought is that if our body is going to become immune and is going to establish this attack force against the spike proteins, that it will do the same thing against this placental protein and therefore trigger unwanted miscarriages or prevent pregnancy from being established. And this is really nonsense, because the amount of information that is shared between the spike protein and this placental protein is so small, it would be analogous to having the same last digit in our phone number. If Dr. Yu and I both had 7 at the end of our phone numbers, suggesting that you'd be able to take a good guess and dial the same number for the both of us. It's that far-fetched. So please make sure that you don't fall prey to these narratives that are unfortunately being spread widely across YouTube and a lot of social media. It's a very tantalizing and easily suggestible narrative if you're not paying attention to the actual science and getting the information from credible sources. No risk of infertility with the vaccines.
Great, thank you, Dr. Sharkawy. And we're coming right back to you. Our next 2 questions are, what is herd immunity? And then can you tell us a little bit about the emerging COVID variants? How effective is the vaccine against the emerging, the new emerging variants?
Sorry, those are for me? Okay, happy to help. Yeah, sure. So herd immunity refers to the idea of having the herd, if you will, the better part of our community immune against a particular threat, whether it's a virus, a bacteria, or something else. That can be achieved through many ways. It could be through people becoming naturally immune, having survived an infection and produce the antibodies that will allow them to protect themselves if they are re-exposed, and in so doing, preventing them from being able to transmit an infection to others because the infection can't take hold in them when they are re-exposed. That process, unfortunately, can cost a lot of lives. We've seen that it hasn't worked very well in places like the US, where millions of people have died, or Italy, where the healthcare system almost collapsed in parts of April when people were dying right and left. So Herd immunity will work if a virus is not very lethal, and it's something that doesn't potentially spread as ravenously as COVID-19 does. It doesn't work in this instance, and that's why we need vaccines. Vaccines will help us to become immune before we actually get the infection, and in so doing, prevent us from being able to transmit it amongst ourselves. When enough people are immune to a given virus, then the virus sort of runs out of susceptible targets. It sort of keeps bouncing off of walls, if you will, but everyone it runs into has either become immune naturally or has become immune through vaccination. And because it runs out of susceptible hosts, it can't circulate very widely anymore, and hopefully it disappears. Will it eventually disappear? We hope so. At least we hope it will become so low in terms of its level of circulating transmission within our communities, it won't present with the same level of threat and difficulty we're facing right now. Our estimates are that we would need somewhere between about 70 to 85% of our population immune to achieve what we call herd immunity. And that's important because that's the number at which we can envision our lives going back to quote unquote normal. Having weddings together, being able to have dinners and celebrating occasions that are of a cultural or religious or personal nature without worrying about being able to exchange the virus. Similarly, with respect to team sports and a whole bunch of other things that have changed radically with the pandemic. So that's what the concept of herd immunity is. Now, these new variants are unfortunately throwing a bit of a curveball into everything. The new variants are essentially mutant forms of the virus. Viruses mutate all the time because they tend to replicate a lot and produce millions of copies of themselves on a daily basis. Their proofreading ability is not very good. They make mistakes, and so they create different forms or strains of themselves. Some of those strains are entirely useless. In fact, some of them may make the virus less fit, less able to replicate, weaker if they infect their host. Some of them, unfortunately, will do the opposite. And in the case of the variants that have emerged from the United Kingdom, from South Africa, and from Brazil, the one commonality between all of them is it has seemed to confer the ability to spread more rapidly, which means that this strain, these mutations will allow that form of the virus to actually become more contagious between ourselves when we are interacting with one another. And at least in terms of the South African and the Brazilian variants, they do seem to cause disease that is more severe. There's a little bit of debate as to whether that is indeed the case with the UK strain, but definitely for the Brazilian and South African forms, it can cause disease that's more severe. So that is a little bit of a concern for sure. It means that we have to be that much more diligent and aware when it comes to our public health measures, masking more consistently, distancing as much as possible, limiting our interactions and our private contacts with people, particularly indoors. Now, there's still very good news here because despite these variants sounding very scary, I refer to them sort of jestingly as scariants, there's still a lot of positive news for us in terms of how our existing vaccines are working. We have very good evidence at this point that the Moderna vaccines and the Pfizer vaccines are very useful in terms of preventing more serious disease occurring and being effective against all of these strains, particularly the UK strain. They do seem to be less effective against the South African strain and the Brazilian strain in terms of preventing infection, but they are still very, very effective, at least 85% in one of the studies showing that it prevented severe disease. So at the end of the day, the vaccines are still doing their job to prevent very serious outcomes to people who've received them, even if they have been exposed to one of these variants. And at the end of the day, I think what we need to know as people living in our communities, we can't take our foot off of the brake. We have to be very, very vigilant in terms of following through with all of those tried and true public health recommendations. We're going to need them even without the variants until we achieve herd immunity. So continue to mask, continue to wash your hands, continue to limit indoor meetings with people and all forms of private engagements. Limit everything to things that are as essential as possible. That will help us bridge the gap between where we are right now and herd immunity and prevent people from getting sick and prevent people from dying.
Thank you, Dr. Sharkawy. The next question is for you, Dr. Shamji. I'll just read the three out. They're all interrelated. Why are there 2 doses of the vaccine? How long does the immunity given by the vaccine last? And will we need a booster or an annual shot like the flu shot?
Okay, great. Thank you very much for those questions. Those are excellent questions. So right now, the 2 vaccines that have been approved in Canada are the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, and both of those require 2 doses. In the case of Pfizer, it requires a second dose 21 days apart, and Moderna in the studies was 28 days apart. And the reason for that is partially because of the way that our immune system works. When we're exposed to something, anything foreign, not just COVID-19, our body develops an immune response. It generates things, antibodies, as Dr. Sharkawy had mentioned earlier, and then those circulate within our blood as memory cells eventually. And the same is true when you get a vaccine. Now, the more times that our bodies and our immune systems are exposed to something foreign, the better it becomes at being able to combat that. That's one of the reasons why, for example, if you ever got chickenpox as a child, you almost certainly will not get it again. In the same way, when you receive the first dose of either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine, you get some antibodies and you get an immune response and you begin to develop some immunity. But when you expose your body and your immune system a second time, your immune system is sharper, its antibodies become more accurate, they deploy more rapidly, and they are vastly more effective at being able to combat COVID-19 if it is to be exposed to you again in the future. What we've also learned is that when you get the second dose of these vaccines anyways, the duration of the immunity after the first vaccine dose, after the vaccine doses, becomes significantly longer. So by getting 2 doses of the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, we get a faster response, a more effective response, and a longer lasting response. So it's totally worth it to get the 2 shots. I will say that some of the other vaccines on the market, or that may come on the market, some of them have been designed as single shot doses. The Johnson & Johnson one is one that may end up being approved in Canada. It's very interesting because it is not proven to be as effective as the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, and it is only 1 dose. And my understanding actually is that the manufacturer may look at whether a 2-dose regimen may lead to greater effectiveness. And based on the science, it's reasonable to assume that it could. But for the time being, Moderna and Pfizer, which are the vaccines that we're being offered currently, do definitely benefit from getting that second shot. And it's important to show up for that second appointment when you're lucky enough to have it offered to you. I think we began to discuss this a little bit earlier in terms of how long the immunity from the vaccine lasts. You know, it's so interesting. We're in this miraculous age where science has moved so quickly. It hasn't even been a year since we've tested the first individuals with the COVID-19 vaccines have not even existed for a year. So it is literally impossible for us to say whether it could last longer than a year. I think Moderna has come out and said that they have good reason to believe that it will last at least a year, but time will tell with that. And it's one of the reasons that we still have to continue being very careful. Even though I've got 2 doses, I continue to wear my mask, not just because I don't know exactly how long my immunity will last, but also in solidarity with everybody else, because everybody else doesn't know. I don't have a sign on my head that says I've been vaccinated against COVID-19. So we're going to have to keep wearing our masks. We're going to have to keep social distancing until we achieve that magical herd immunity. In response to the other question, will we need a booster or an annual shot like the flu shot? Well, I don't think that we know that for sure, but I don't think it's unreasonable to think that we probably will. We've already heard about the Brazilian variant, the UK variant, the South African variant. As the virus continues to mutate, it may well be necessary to refine the vaccines, and that may come out in the form of boosters in the future. And as mentioned, depending on whether we achieve herd immunity, which would then essentially substantially stop viral transmission in the first place. But if we're not able to achieve that, and especially if the immunity doesn't last as long as we hope, then we will have to continue vaccinating our population to make sure that we have excellent protection so we can go back to enjoying our lives, all our social events, our religious events, the way we did before COVID-19 came and changed our lives. So I anticipate that it will, but we can't say for sure.
So a follow-up question to what you've talked about just now is, suppose someone gets the first dose and misses getting the second dose. What happens then?
Okay, that's a great question. And honestly, it's not a problem. We have already been vaccinating. We've had lots of experience vaccinating our frontline healthcare workers. We have lots of experience vaccinating in long-term care homes. And now we're even beginning to do that in the shelters. And people forget or people move and life happens. And so although I would encourage everyone to get that second shot on the day, at the very earliest opportunity and on the day that it's offered to you, if things happen, there will be opportunities for sure to get everyone caught up. It's not just because you want to get that second dose, we want you to get that second dose too, so that we can achieve that herd immunity, so that life can go back to normal. So you can rest assured, we will come back and we will make sure that you've been vaccinated. We've had it happen many times already. And if you miss your second shot, it will be offered to you for sure. Don't worry about that.
Thank you, Dr. Shamji. The next set of questions is for you, Dr. Yu. Just talking a little bit about comorbidities and existing health conditions. So should individuals with conditions such as high blood pressure, asthma, COPD, or diabetes, should they be getting the vaccine?
Absolutely. My recommendation would absolutely be for individuals with comorbidities, such as what you've outlined, Munira, that they should get the COVID vaccine. We do know that those who have these comorbidities can get quite seriously ill. And what we mean by that, they are the type of, unfortunately, patients who will have to be hospitalized, need intubation, need life support sometimes, or even die. And so we absolutely would recommend this specifically for individuals who have asthma and COPD and all of those that you've mentioned. And I wonder, Munira, were you also wanting me to touch a little bit about autoimmune conditions such as lupus? And
yes, I was going to follow up with that. Absolutely. If you could talk a little bit about autoimmune conditions such as lupus, those who are on steroids, and also, for example, patients who are receiving chemotherapy.
Absolutely. And I'd also invite Dr. Sharkawy for more evidence on this if there's something else to add. What I can say is that in general, patients who have weaker immune systems should really strongly consider getting the COVID vaccine when it is available to them, of course. And there is some evidence already out there to show that if you are on high dose steroids on a regular basis, that you can actually tend to get more ill if you do get COVID. So particularly for the non-live vaccines for COVID, those who are receiving steroids or cancer therapy should really consider getting the COVID vaccine. Of course, you should talk to your primary care provider or your health professionals to discuss this decision. But again, just to reiterate that I'm talking about the non-live vaccines rather than vaccines later on that may be approved down the pipeline. So just in terms of the 2 vaccines that are recommended in Canada or approved in Canada, you should really consider getting it if you're on steroids or receiving therapy right now that's causing your immune system to be weaker.
And Dr. Sharkawy, would you like to add into that?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to reinforce what Dr. Yu stated. I think that there is this unspoken belief that unfortunately has been widely shared that vaccine equals trigger of autoimmunity. And so if you have lupus, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, if you have inflammatory bowel disease, and you get a vaccine, that is inherently a risk to a flare. And unfortunately, it's not true. Or fortunately, it is not true. And I think that there are some caveats according to the nature of the vaccine itself and the timing and type of the immunosuppression. It's very critical to understand specifically what type of immunosuppression it is. Immunosuppression is not a generic thing where it's the same form of immunity that is suppressed in everyone. There are different arms of immunity called B cell and T cell immunity, and some of the immune suppressive agents that are used for some of these conditions will do a more potent job suppressing one arm versus another. And that's something that needs to be discussed with your healthcare practitioner. But I can tell you by and large, I've done a lot of these sessions for patients with autoimmune connective tissue diseases, arthritis, for example, and multiple sclerosis. The majority of vaccines that are used and the evidence that is out there suggests that more often than not, getting sick with the particular ailment is actually much more likely to trigger a flare and make you much sicker than the vaccine itself. There's a wide range of immunosuppressive agents which can still be safely maintained, including things like prednisone or methotrexate, and a lot of other biologic therapies that are now very commonly used as infusions or injections for a wide range of conditions that can be still safely maintained with vaccines. And we have no reason to believe with the mRNA vaccines that are currently available that should change. There are some conditions in which you will be using a type of immune suppression that may be very potent. And the main issue will be the timing as to when that should be started, so that if you get the vaccine, you have the optimal opportunity to develop an immune response and to fully establish that immune response without that immune suppressive agent hindering that. That's the key thing. That's a very individualized decision that needs to be made with your specialist, with your healthcare provider. But again, I want to reassure you, by and large, that most of the vaccines that we have been using for years and years and years for things like influenza and pneumonia and regular vaccines that we use to update people for travel and other purposes are safe with autoimmune conditions, even with immune suppressive medications on board. So please feel reassured with that.
Thank you. Dr. Yu, just one more question about comorbidities and conditions. If someone is on blood thinners, can they take this vaccine?
Yes, yes, the vaccine, being on blood thinners is not a contraindication to actually receiving the vaccine. You will notice when you're offered the vaccine that you will be asked, are you on blood thinners? And it's really a simple explanation. The reason being is anyone who's on blood thinners, if we're injecting you and jabbing you with a needle on your arm, we want to know that we would need to apply some more pressure, maybe a few more minutes than usual, so that you don't get any bruising. But certainly being on blood thinners is not a contraindication.
Thank you. The next set of questions is something we're hearing about a lot in the community. I'm not sure how many times this would have been upticked, but it's one of the safety concerns around the vaccine. Dr. Sharkawy, I'll pose this question to you, is about how the vaccine was developed very, very quickly. So how do we know it's safe? What the question says is, I'm very worried we seem to be rushing this and we're being pushed into just accepting it. So how was the vaccine tested for safety and effectiveness?
Such important questions. And I promise you that I will answer this in a way that makes sense. Now, we're dealing with unprecedented conditions right now. We probably heard that word and heard the word historic more often than we want over the last 12 months, but it truly is the case. And what that means is that we have had to harness our research resources, our medical community, and a lot of different resources have been really streamlined and focused. And we've ignored some other things that are obviously of a much less urgent priority to put our time and efforts into developing a vaccine for COVID-19. Now, one of the things we were able to do was we were actually able to sequence the virus. We were actually be able to map the virus itself and get the blueprint that we needed. That takes time, but because of the advances in technology and science, we were able to do that very quickly. In fact, we did that right here in Toronto with my colleagues at Sunnybrook Hospital. Very proud of that. And then what we were able to do is that we were able to say, look, this is a problem that is affecting the entire world. So rather than waiting and taking time to enroll people, 10, 20, 30, 40,000 people, which normally occurs over a period of several years, we're going to do it over a period of months. It's still the same number of people that you would need to get a very representative and very valid understanding of whether a vaccine works or not. We were simply able to do it because we had people who were ready and willing, thankfully, to be in these clinical trials. So there's no shortcut being taken there. For still the same number of people that you would need for a phase 3 trial to be validated. We moved from a handful of people to the thousands from phase 1 to phase 3. So that was followed to the letter of the law. The other situation that made this somewhat advantageous, if you will, is the fact that in most instances, when you're using a vaccine, the level of the infection circulating in the community isn't that high. So it takes time to not only amass the number of participants that are needed, but to actually balance that or judge it based on what effect it is having within a given community. But because there was so much COVID-19 going on all over the world, we had a really valid representation of whether the vaccine was doing what it should or not. Those two things worked together and no shortcuts were taken. You had 30,000 people in the Moderna trial. We had 44,000 people in the Pfizer trial. That's a good number of people, okay? And so from the pure number standpoint and the structure, nothing wrong, no corners cut, nothing done there that would not have been acceptable in another trial that took much longer. Now, what about safety, you would say? A few points. First of all, you probably heard that the news releases and the press releases were going off when there was somebody who got sick with a condition called transverse myelitis. They had a neurologic issue. The Johnson & Johnson trial was stopped. It was suspended. We had the same issue in another vaccine trial. Everything was halted. The manufacturers did exactly what they should. They said, we're not going to subject anyone else to these vaccines until we determined that there was no clear link between what happened in these given participants and the vaccine. And they took their time and they found that there was no association. In fact, in one of the cases, we found out that somebody injured themselves while they were jogging, and that affected their spinal column. It was not an immune-based issue whatsoever. So that's very reassuring that no one tried to cut corners or say something about an association that was related to a safety issue that wasn't true. Now, the other question that's being asked often is, okay, but still, you did this and they've been around for what, 3 months? How do we know that they're not, going to cause harm, in 6 months? How do I know that in a year something bad won't happen to me? Well, let's look at history. The side effects of the overwhelming majority of vaccines that have been used in the last 100 years, in 90% plus of cases occur within a time frame of about 30 to 45 days, okay? It's not 4 years later. So if you get vaccinated in 2020, you're not going to end up with a side effect that first rears its head in 2024. That is just contrary to the principles of how our immune system reacts to anything, frankly, especially a vaccine. Okay, what did the trial set out to do? The vaccines were not actually allowed to be authorized for use until 60 days. Okay, and the safety was looked at for more than 60 days after 50% of the trial participants received their second dose. So remember, I said 30 to 45 days is the typical window of time within which we see the overwhelming majority of side effects, whether they're serious or not. The trials went to 60 days. So I think we can feel very reassured that we're not going to have any scary, strange, unintended side effects that are occurring months down the road. So we're compressing things into a tighter time frame, but we still use the best methodology with the same rigorous oversight we'd be using in any trial, whether it's for a drug or a vaccine. And that gives me a lot of confidence that these vaccines truly are safe.
Thank you, Dr. Sharkawy. Dr. Shamji, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, I wanted to add just a few very quick points to the already comprehensive answer that we just heard. The first is the speed at which the vaccine came out is something that I think we should celebrate. Just to put things into context, we sequenced the human genome for the first time in 2003, and that took 13 years. We had a sequence of this virus within, I think it was 1 month. And then and almost immediately, we had some preliminary designs for this vaccine. One reason that no vaccine has been developed this fast before is it has never been possible. We have not had the technology or scientific understanding to accomplish, quite frankly, this miracle. And so when I see what we've accomplished in less than a year, I don't see something that scares me. I see something that makes me so proud. Now, in response to the safety issues. So first of all, the studies that were done on both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines were very, very, very robust. And they've been looked at and they've been published and they've been scrutinized by the scientific community. And already at this moment in time, millions of people around the world have already received the vaccine and have had it for more than that magical 30 or 45 days that Dr. Sharkawy told us was the main period in which major side effects are going to happen. So on the basis of all of those people who have, all of those millions of people, we know that there aren't even any rare, like 1 in a million side effects, because now that we're deploying the vaccine, every country in the world, Canada included, is doing very, very careful post-vaccine safety monitoring. Now, as an emergency doctor, one of the things that I have had to do has been to supervise, well, I've helped administer vaccines, both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. And I've also had the privilege of watching this magical moment for many people when they have received their vaccine, and I've supervised. And I have been there as an emergency doctor to respond to any reactions. And although we've talked about allergic reactions in the past, in the hundreds of people that I've supervised, I have never seen it. This vaccine is safe. I have 100% confidence in it. And I had 0 reservations when I got my vaccine earlier this month.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shamji. Actually, the next question, this is like aligning. I know, Dr. Sharkawy, you wanted a minute just to add something in, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
Sure. I just want to piggyback on what Dr. Shamji was saying. The CDC actually released some excellent data not all that long ago on 2+ million people receiving the vaccine, and they found that 89% of the side effects were very fleeting in nature. They were very short-lived and minor. And there was something in the neighborhood of around 300 plus ER visits. I mean, can you imagine? Dr. Shamji knows what people show up to the ER for, whether it's life-threatening or not. You can imagine something in the order of magnitude of 300 out of 2 million. That is pretty minuscule in terms of people even feeling the need to go to the ER. So very, very reassuring data.
Great, thank you. And that actually segues into our next sort of topic, which is sort of what do the side effects look like? Are there long-term side effects? Could there be side effects with medication? And sorry, Dr. Shamji, I'm going to look to you to answer some of these questions now.
Certainly, that would be my pleasure. So are there any side effects? So I'll tell you from my own experience. So on and I think there's been a bit of confusion. I don't think people heard me very well. So you can see me getting my COVID-19 vaccination on my Twitter there. So if actions speak louder than words, just pop onto my Twitter there and there's a video. But on January 1st, I got my vaccine. I felt fine. I got it in the morning, and about later in the early evening, my left arm, which is where they had put the injection, it began to feel a little bit sore. That was it. I came back 3 weeks later on January 22nd in the early afternoon, and I got my second shot. Later that afternoon, my left shoulder was a little bit more sore. In the evening, I had chills for about 30 seconds, and the next morning, I had a bit of a headache. And as I mentioned before, those to me were signs that my immune system was becoming activated, and so I was happy that I saw those things happen. As I mentioned before, you cannot get COVID-19 from this vaccine. Some of my colleagues who I work with who've been vaccinated, some of them had absolutely no symptoms at all. A few of them had side effects that were a little bit more. Some of them said that they felt very tired. A couple of them said that they had, I think 2 of them said that they had a fever the next day. But there were really no major side effects. The one thing that has been reported before and everybody's very worried about is a kind of allergic reaction called anaphylaxis. And to be honest with you, it can happen. But allergic reactions and anaphylaxis can happen when you get anything. Some of you may have children who get anaphylaxis to peanuts or to shellfish. You may have an allergic reaction to penicillin, and therefore you're not allowed to get penicillin antibiotics anymore. So the fact that it is possible, rarely, to have an allergic reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine is not something that should turn you off from getting the vaccine. Do we need to be careful? Of course. And that's why when people at our hospital get the vaccine, myself as an emergency doctor or someone else is standing by and ready to respond. And we have our protocols ready for that. But this is no different than anything else that happens. With anything else, even things like peanuts or shellfish or anything like that. In terms of long-term side effects, I think we've already discussed that. I am not aware of any long-term side effects. And so I don't think that there is anything that you need to worry about from that perspective. In response to the final sort of twist on that, can it be fatal to receive this vaccination? Well, it can be fatal to eat peanuts if you have a severe allergic reaction to peanuts and you do it at home and you don't have an EpiPen and you don't have someone like me standing behind you to protect you. But that will not be how it is for you. If we discover that you are allergic to one of the components, and we already know what they are, and when you come in for your vaccination, we check to make sure you're not allergic to any of the components. But even if you didn't know that, and you were one of the extremely unlucky ones, and I say again, after having witnessed hundreds of vaccinations, I've never actually seen one of these reactions myself. But if you are one of those very unlucky and very rare people to get that reaction, I will be there for you, or one of my colleagues will. You can rest assured about that.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Shamji, I'm just going to follow up one more quick second. Are there any side effect, or is there like any direct correlations to certain medications? If you're taking any type of specific medications to the vaccine, will there be any side effects to that?
I am not aware of any bad interactions with the COVID-19 vaccine and any other medications. If you're the kind of individual who's on many medications, you're probably used to being counseled by your pharmacist about which medications to avoid. As far as I'm concerned, if you are one of those people who is on many medications because you have high cholesterol or diabetes, you've had a stroke or a heart attack, To me, that's even more of a reason to get the COVID-19 vaccination, not to be afraid. Dr. Yu?
I agree with you, Adil, in terms of the analysis of the information that I have. What I just like to add as a family doctor who also gives other vaccines in conjunction, perhaps in the future with the COVID vaccine, just some considerations have been thought through in terms of the timing of other vaccines and this particular vaccine. None of the timing issues that I will mention should preclude people from getting the COVID vaccine, but what I will say is that we do currently try to space out, the recommendations are to currently try to space out other vaccines from the COVID vaccine by at least 7 days. You know, if it happens that you receive the vaccine within 7 days of another vaccine, there also isn't any known bad effect. It's just that it's ideal if we are able to space the vaccines out so that we're able to figure out if you've got an adverse reaction to one vaccine, which was responsible for the reaction. And the other thought is that when administering 2 vaccines at the same time, that some learnings that we've had with other vaccines is that the full immune response may not be completely achieved. Again, these are minor academic considerations, I think. I think at the end of it, practically speaking, you know, we just want to know if you've had a vaccine recently so that we know what we're expecting in terms of attributing adverse effects to the vaccine.
Awesome, thank you. And we just have one more question, Dr. Shamji. Yeah, not off the hook yet. Is how do we know which vaccine is the best to take? Is it better to wait and see?
I think the best vaccine to take is the vaccine that is offered to you. And that is certainly is the attitude that I had. Had it been Pfizer, I would have been ecstatic. Had it been Moderna, I would have been ecstatic. My parents have not been vaccinated yet, but you can rest assured the moment there is any vaccine available to them, because the moment any vaccine is available to them, I will be telling them to use, I will be telling them to try and get that, no matter, you know, in whatever processes are in place. I really genuinely trust our drug review program in Canada. I also trust the fact that these drugs are reviewed by so many other countries and the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control. So honestly, my advice would be, it is more important for all of us to get vaccinated in some way as soon as possible, and not to worry too much about which one it is, as long as it's approved in Canada.
I think we wanted to also invite Dr. Sharkawy to comment on interactions with other medications.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think that there's a specific reason to be concerned in terms of the vaccine specifically interacting with medications, but there's one point that is a bit controversial. I still think it's worth mentioning, and that's of using things like Advil, ibuprofen, Motrin, certain pain relievers that may help reduce fever and discomfort. There is a theoretical concern that they may impair the immune response. And so if you are getting your vaccine and you want to take something for pain or for fever, we would probably recommend that it's safer to use Tylenol or something that is not a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug-based therapy. It's not the end of the world if you happen to have taken 1 dose of Advil, but we would probably recommend that it's not worth it. You want to give yourself your best opportunity for the immune response to be as robust as possible. So I would recommend lots of Tylenol. My arm was a little bit more sore than I thought it would be. So I actually found Tylenol and icing my arm really helped a lot.
Thank you. I'm going to move into the questions that are being submitted live on the chat. One of the first questions that I have here is about children, that the vaccine currently is not available for children. So basically the question, since vaccines are not for kids under 16 yet, but they still can get infected and transmit, what protection do kids have once adults 16 plus get vaccinated? And I'll open this up to the panel, whoever would like to answer.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different studies that are ongoing right now for the enrollment of kids, primarily over the age of 12. So Moderna has a trial right now enrolling kids between the ages of 12 and 17. They're actually having a little bit of a tough time enrolling as many as they wanted. And Pfizer is also enrolling between the ages of 12 and 15 and has already been authorized for 16 years of age and older. In terms of kids that are younger than that, they will take longer. There are some trials that have been ongoing in China since September, but they are to vaccines that are probably not going to be front runners, but they've been actually trialing them on kids as young as 3 years of age, believe it or not. So we'd be very interested to hear what their data shows. I think what we're likely going to see is that we probably will not be getting trials on kids under the age of 12 for some of these front-runner vaccines, probably until 2022. And the reason for that is that, generally speaking, vaccines that are used in kids have to be formulated a little differently and probably with a lower dose than what is used for the adult population. And then what would be done is probably a dose escalation process where they use sequentially higher doses to see what's the most effective. That may be a bit unsatisfying, but I think the benefit of having everyone else vaccinated is still very much important. If all the teachers around our school-age children and all the teenage siblings and parents and people working and living in the community are all immune, we know that it's very unlikely that there's going to be a real problem around kids because they are not going to be infected as frequently as a result of that. And we know, thankfully, that by and large, even when kids are infected, that they are generally relatively mild in terms of their symptoms and their disease presentations. So the kids are hopefully going to be getting the benefit of herd immunity around them. And in time, they will likely get a vaccine delivered to them, but that's going to be a while. I think we're going to want to see what happens by late spring, early summer, when we see the results coming from the trials in age 12 and older. And then at that point, we'll probably be in a better position to know how quickly and when younger children would be able to be vaccinated as well. So,
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Sharkawy. I know we're getting several questions in the question and answer about prioritizing Thorncliffe and Flemington. So I definitely am not catching it in order. So I apologize just because we keep seeing the question pop up. So I'm hoping Councillor Robinson and Dr. Yu, if you could address some of these concerns and questions that folks are having.
Thank you very much. I'll start. This is frustrating for all of us. I have this question, I pose this question to our medical officer of health for the City of Toronto constantly, and we are, as a council, meeting this week, and there will be an update, a status report from our medical officer of health. She is working closely with the province of Ontario, as are all of us. And as I explained off the top, and I'm going to repeat it just so everybody's crystal clear. It's very confusing, all the orders and levels of government for everybody. People are never clear. I am the local city councillor for Toronto. Provincially, you have an MPP, and federally an MP. The MPs and the Prime Minister of Canada, I almost said Prime Minister of Ontario, that would be a new term. The Prime Minister of Canada, they're working diligently to secure the vaccinations for the whole country. And, there's been stops and starts and some frustration around that due to the various companies either retooling their operations or for various reasons. I share your concern, and, more. We need more, we need them faster, we need them really right across the whole country. So that's happening per capita in every province, where the federal government is securing the vaccinations and then per capita getting them to the various provinces across our country. Then the provinces, whether it's ours or other provinces across Ontario, but Ontario, in our case, is responsible for then distributing the vaccinations throughout the entire province. I keep saying Toronto's, one of the epicenters of COVID, and I would like to see more traction in our city on this. But as you know, the right people have been prioritized in long-term care, and our medical staff who've been fighting this for months without any protection outside of PPE. So we're really grateful to our medical staff across our province who have really risked their lives and worked tirelessly to combat this unknown, very aggressive virus. So they needed to be prioritized and are being. I always, when I'm talking to staff at Sunnybrook, which is in the middle of the heart of my ward, I'm always asking, how many people have been, how many staff at Sunnybrook have been inoculated, and the number keeps rising. So it's good news. It's trending in the right direction. It's just not fast enough. And so, as I said earlier, the province of Ontario has the protocols around whose arm the needle goes into. As a City of Toronto representative, I wish I had that authority. I would love to have that authority because I would prioritize Thorncliffe Park. But what I can tell you is I have a good working relationship with both the federal and provincial government, and I am going to be pushing for Thorncliffe Park, as I always do, to ensure that it's prioritized. It has been a hot spot. We all know that, and if that's not an indication, I don't know what is, that we need to get it to Thorncliffe Park. So right now in Thorncliffe Park, there's 144 active cases. We have a positivity rate of 22.6%. That is high. Now, at times it comes down a little bit, and that's good news. And I think it's largely due to the community's work in trying to really contain the virus. And people are social distancing, wearing masks, and washing their hands, and staying home unless there's an essential trip required to the grocery store. So we need more of that, and you're doing a great job. And the bottom line is the vaccination will be rolled out. There's a whole efficacy piece to this that's really influencing how it's rolled out. But I don't have a firm answer for you. I wish I did. Every day, I wish I had an answer. But they are prioritizing, and I'm going to be pushing very aggressively for Thorncliffe Park. Having said that, the province of Ontario has control over the machine and the operation that is rolling out the vaccination.
Thank you for that explanation, Councillor Robinson. I also just wanted to add my perspective and weigh in. I'm very grateful for this question from the community members. This question needs to continuously be brought up around advocating for this neighborhood. What I can share from the perspective of a family doctor and from those of us who are primary care practitioners in the community is that we will be a part of the arm to actually do distribution. And we would really like to continue to be a part of the co-design to get this done. We have learned our lessons from the beginning of COVID. You might remember that when we started to have pop-ups in assessment centers, that Thorncliffe community actually was one of the communities that had the pop-ups come out first compared to other communities maybe who have been less prioritized. We have been working, and I say we are my team in HATP along with our community agency lead as well, the neighborhood organization with the city to really advocate for this community. So Councillor Robinson, I'm really looking forward to working more closely with you and Toronto Public Health specifically. We've had our lessons learned around the school openings, and we really want to leverage those lessons learned and continue to say, you know what, advocating is one thing, but is actually getting out there and doing the distribution and the rollout is a big operational piece that primary care really needs to be a part of and wants to be helpful in. So thank you for that question to the community members who've asked that. Please keep on asking that question and holding us all accountable.
Thank you so much. I am aware of the time. We've got so much information that's been shared already. I'm just going to actually ask our panelists if they want to really summarize any quick messages before I'm going to just hand it off to Dr. Yu to give us a little bit of a closing remarks. So if anyone wanted to add anything before we go, and then I'll pass it over to Dr. Yu, and then I'll give a follow-up as well.
I don't mind saying just something, just very briefly. I think Thorncliffe Park is an amazing community. It is an amazing community. It is strong, it is tight-knit, and it supports each other. One of the reasons this is because we live close together. And one of the things that makes us so tight-knit and strong also is one of our vulnerabilities. Our community has 34 high-rise apartments. It has the largest elementary school in North America. And what that means is that despite all of the strengths that this brings to us, it is also the circumstance and the environment in which COVID-19 likes to spread. Now, through the miracle, I believe, of science, in less than a year, we have an incredible vaccine. Well, we have 2 vaccines already and more to come. They are 95% effective, which is about as close to perfect as we can get. And this has the opportunity for us to be able to work towards achieving a sense of normalcy again, and so that we can achieve that closeness and that support with each other before long. And so I would encourage everyone, I think Dr. Yu and Dr. Sharkawy have been vaccinated. I have been vaccinated. I invite you, follow our lead. Get the vaccine for yourselves, for your families, for your community, so that we can move forward and go back to enjoying each other's company and our lives the way we used to. I have zero reservation in this vaccine, and I invite everyone to follow our lead. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Manair.
No, I was just saying, Dr. Sharkawy, if you'd like to go next.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know that I could. That's a pretty hard act to follow there with Dr. Shamji. I think he summarized it very nicely. You know, it's the paradox of our shared strengths and vulnerabilities that I think has made this such a difficult process for all of us to experience. Who would have thought a year ago that spending time together with people you care about and people you love, and engaging face-to-face, organically and intimately, would lead to such devastating consequences, but yet here we are. So it's a very sobering perspective. I think that the great blessing of this pandemic has been an opportunity to learn more about each other, to engage, to find out that there are channels of support, that there are avenues of advocacy that are very real, that are incredibly special in terms of the people who are working to make them effective. And that's something that we should celebrate, and it's something we should not lose sight of. We're going to need a lot more of it. The inequities that have been exposed by this pandemic are appalling, quite frankly. They are staggering in nature in terms of the circumstances in which many communities have been forced to function and to live on for too long. And I think that we would be remiss not to use this as an opportunity to look at the social determinants of health with a more critical lens, to advocate more fiercely, more determinedly for people in our communities who have been suffering. And we need to, I think, champion the causes of things like paid sick leave, of greater access to healthcare resources. In the case of COVID, it means more mobile testing. I think it's going to need more support for our school environments, and a lot of other things that I think are just so critical to maintaining healthy economies and healthy communities, even outside of the context of a pandemic. So let's not lose sight of that. I'm really impressed and really heartened to see what I'm seeing in terms of the level of advocacy at a real sincere grassroots level in Thorncliffe Park. It makes me proud to know that kind of sentiment, that sort of drive and commitment to helping people is alive and thriving. And that's my hope, that we'll be able to not only get through this, but hopefully change the quality of people's lives for the better, well beyond the end of this pandemic. And that's ultimately what we should all be striving for.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharkawy. I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Yu just for our closing remarks, and then I will wrap up our session.
So well said, Dr. Sharkawy and Dr. Shamji. I don't have very much to add other than to really thank the community and reassure the community that we are your arms and your network to help actually act on all of these ideas of how we can, as the community, get through the pandemic together. You know, currently, without the vaccines being broadly available yet, really our best defense from COVID include getting tested if you have symptoms, especially if you have been in close contact with someone who has tested positive. Continue to wear your masks in public spaces, continue to do your physical distancing and avoiding crowds, wash your hands. You know, we are in the community, by we, I mean the Health Access Thorncliffe Park community ambassadors. I'd actually like to invite Amira to speak a bit about that. We want to continue to connect with you so we understand what your needs are, so we can continue to really advocate for active, pragmatic next steps. Amira, go ahead and please introduce our community ambassadors.
Yes, thank you. So as with every sort of technical call, there's always one glitch, and that is that we are not able to actually spotlight our community ambassadors, their faces, but I can definitely, I think we may have got one here. So we are so fortunate at Health Access Thorncliffe Park to have 4 amazing community health ambassadors who have been out in the community, sharing resources, talking to residents. Oh, there we go. We're getting some of them there. So folks, if you could turn your cameras on, that would be great. But really like out there and getting a pulse of what folks are concerned about, making sure that they're connected to resources, making sure that they're getting support if they have tested positive for COVID. So I'd just like to take a moment to introduce Raha Mahmoudi. Can you turn your camera on, Raha? I hope this works. Yes, maybe.
I don't think I could turn it
No?
on.
Okay. Okay. Atif, are you okay to turn your camera on and give us a little wave?
We don't have the option to
No?
turn on the camera. Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah,
As I
that's
said, we made it. Yeah, we made
Sorry,
it.
we're learning.
Yeah, we made it 2 hours without any glitches, but we do have Raha Mahmoudi, Atif Zaidi, we have Khadija, Yusuf, and Ahmed Shah. So thank you so much to these 4 amazing individuals who continue to do the work on the ground with our partners. Yes, thank you, Councillor Robinson. Thank you. They definitely deserve that round of applause. We have working really closely with our partners to make sure that the messages are getting out there. As Catherine said, we continue to do our social distancing. We continue to wear a mask. So thank you to our amazing team who continues to spread that word for us. And then I'm going to pass it over to Manira and Catherine if you wanted to add anything.
I think Dr. Sharkawy promises something, so I'd like to actually give my mic to him.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Very humble and gracious of you, Dr. Yu. The one point that I just want to leave you with here, and it may seem so obvious, but it's please don't take anything for granted. And I'm just going to share a very short story with you. Yesterday, I took my kids with me to a restaurant that I like to go to in Scarborough, in one of the harder hit neighborhoods, actually, from COVID-19. But it's a place that makes maybe the best shish tawuk and shawarma I can find anywhere, and my kids like the pizza. And we hadn't gone there in a long time. And I was very chagrined when I went in there and I saw, you know, a couple of the younger people working in the kitchen, and their masks were not being worn properly. And I took the time to speak with the younger employee there, and I told him that I was concerned, and I didn't want to scold him for not wearing his mask, but I asked him why he wasn't wearing his mask properly. He told me it's very hot in the kitchen. It's very uncomfortable. It's very difficult for him to do his job. And I explained to him as a frontline worker what it's like intubating people who are 17, 20, 25 years of age, the discomfort that they feel, the risk that they are putting themselves in when they become critically ill. And I told him that if it were up to me, if me not getting my shawarma or even a single grain of rice was what it took to keep him safe, then I wouldn't want that. I would forsake that to keep him safe. And there were tears in his eyes because he recognized that the risk is not obvious and that we need to care about each other and recognize that these innocent acts are maybe not so innocent after all. He put his mask on. He told everyone in the kitchen to put their mask on, and he agreed that he felt uncomfortable. He would take a walk outside or he would take a break. And I think this is the kind of attitude we need to share with each other, to not judge and not assume that our young people are being negligent or they're being apathetic. We need to help them understand, and we need to help give them perspective, and we need to share, I think, a message of compassion and understanding with each other. Please don't take that for granted. Let's educate and share as much as we can with one another so that we can get through this. Thank you for affording me the time to share that with you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharkawy. That really hits home, that story, that anecdote, and you're absolutely right. Those who have not been directly impacted by COVID might not know what it looks like and what you're seeing. So we appreciate that. We appreciate how you, all of you, are advocating on different levels of media, social media, on the news, and letting us know what it looks like and how severe the impact can be. So thank you very much for that. I'm aware of the time. And I just wanted everyone listening to know we've received lots of questions, lots of comments in the chat. We promise you this is the first of many sessions. We want to continue to keep this forum as a place where you can come to have your questions, your concerns answered. We're not firm on the date yet, but we're looking at the next session to be in about 4 weeks' time. In the meantime, we'll be sharing the recording of the webinar today. And in the next session, we will start off with the questions that have not been addressed today. And in subsequent sessions, we'll look at bringing on panelists that might be, like, for example, we've talked a lot about prioritization. So does that mean we're looking at panelists from different levels of government? So based on what kind of questions and concerns we have, we will continue to modulate what this session looks like based on what you all need. So with that, I thank all of you. I'd like to give a special shout out to community members such as Masood Alam, such as Dr. Councillor Jaye, such as Shakil Ahmed. I'm not sure if you're on, and Nadia Zawari, Ishat Mishkati, Safia Parveen. All of you are doing such tremendous work by attending. I'm on all the WhatsApp groups you're on, you're sharing information, you're debunking myths. I hear some of you scolding community members going, get on the forum, get on the question and answer. You need to hear this. You know, we really, really appreciate the efforts that you make without anybody even asking, because you know that this is what is best for the community, with not just information about the vaccine, but also about the impacts of the disease, about how to address the social determinants of health, with the food drives, with the hot meals, with the baby food drives and the toy drives. Like, it is absolutely incredible to see. And I just want to end with that. Like, thank you to all of you and each of you listening today. If you can pass on this information and the link to share with even one other family that might not have been on today, then that way we can spread this message. So with that, I thank all of you for joining today. I thank my esteemed panelists for sharing your expertise and your knowledge. Councillor Robinson, it's absolutely a pleasure to have you on here. And with that, I close today's session. We'll be in touch for the uploading of the session. Thank you very much, all of you.
Good evening, everyone, and bye-bye.
Best wishes, everyone. Stay safe.